Well, let's take you to America now, where we can talk to Peter Pitts, who's a former Associate Commissioner of the US Food and Drug Administration. Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. In terms of how the pandemic is being dealt with in America, where are you with testing?
We are being aggressive, but we need to be more aggressive still. We understand the value both of testing for the presence of the disease as well as for the presence of antibodies for people that have come through to the other end of the tunnel. But as with many places, we need more tests, we need more machines to read those tests, we need more swabs, and we're struggling to find out where they need to come from, make sure the manufacturing quality is of the proper high nature. Obviously, we're learning from the British experience of buying too much stuff from China, sight unseen. So we recognize the importance. We're doing the best we can. We need to do better.
President Trump announced yesterday that the US had passed a testing milestone. He was saying 4.18 million Americans had now been screened. Is that where you would hope to be at this point in time?
Certainly not. We need to be much further down the path. The volume needs to be much higher, but more is better than fewer. And I'm certainly glad to celebrate any milestone.
And what about progress on vaccine? Another element that the president was saying that America is on top of and far ahead of any other country.
Well, there are many different countries from all around the world, multinationals as well as single country companies that are working on a vaccine separately and together. So there are lots of shots on goal. That's a very positive thing. I think one of the things we have to start thinking about here now, as well as around the world, certainly in Britain too, I would imagine, is how do you prioritize who gets a vaccine once it's ready? Healthcare workers, police officers, firefighters, people that clean the streets and stock our supermarket shelves. So the logistics question has to be answered just as urgently as the development question. But I see a vaccine 10 to 12 months out optimistically.
And is that something that's being looked at in terms of the planning as to who would get the vaccine, when, and how it would be distributed? Is that something you're aware of?
Yeah, it's being looked at both the federal and the state level. Obviously, authority is shared. Each state, while having many things similar, will be different in some respects. So it's got to be tailored to the specific area and the populations that it serves.
We're at the moment seeing what's being described as a COVID hotspot emerging in Chicago and Boston. Is there any rationale behind that, any reasoning that's been put forward as to why that is now the case?
Well, COVID-19 in the U.S., regardless of where you are, is not a secret. So I suspect that the growth of cases in both Boston and Chicago is largely due, to better testing. If you don't test, you don't know where these problems are. So that's why the data points are so crucial. But also, different cities view social distancing and sheltering in place, quarantining, in different ways. In New York, we took it very seriously. We took the virus by its throat and are throttling it to the ground. Other cities have different societies and will deal with these issues in different ways. But I think New York is a good lesson to the rest of the world, which is minus a vaccine and medical therapeutics only now coming on the scene. It's really up to us as individuals to take personal responsibility to destroy this virus.
That's interesting, that point that you make, that in various states, culturally, people are receiving the social distancing message differently. I mean, how do you police that as an entire country when different elements are responding differently?
I think writing people tickets, violative tickets for $1,000 is a nice thing for politicians to say, but it doesn't really get the job done. The way to get the job done is for each of us as individuals to recognize that taking these measures isn't only about protecting ourselves and our families, but protecting our neighbors, friends, and families. And I think that message has gotten out. Certainly in New York, our governor's done a wonderful job making this a all hands on deck proposition.
In terms of treatments, where are we? Because we know that the president was very keen to plug hydroxychloroquine, which hasn't been tested, and it's not been confirmed that it is in effect effective at all. There have been some terrible consequences with people taking chloroquine, medicines labelled chloroquine, and it's been fatal. Where are we now with that medicine?
Well, there are a number of issues. The first one is for a lot of existing medicines that are being considered to be repurposed to fight COVID-19, we're doing both standard high-end science clinical trials. That's important. You've got to get the real data. But simultaneously, we're allowing doctors, based on their own discretion, to use these medicines for patients that they feel require it. Now, these patients are largely older patients, patients with pre-existing conditions in hospital who need the help to get through the disease faster and less severely. For the majority of Americans, I think for the majority of anybody in the world, about 85% can ride it out at home with rest and plenty of liquids and tender, loving care. So these treatments that are being repurposed for COVID aren't for the general population. They're for the at-risk population. There are also experimental medicines that are being considered and tried by some doctors that have some degree of success. But, the plural of anecdote isn't data. And interestingly enough, the Sabin oral polio vaccine, an RNA-based vaccine, seems to be having some impact on COVID-19. But these aren't vaccinations, they're not cures. These are medications that might lessen the severity and shorten the duration of the virus. But the data is early yet, but we're letting doctors use it, and we'll see what happens in the real world.
Very interesting. Thank you for clearing that up. Peter Pitts, thank you for speaking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And finally, a nurse has